he makes good points. Even low energy Scott Galloway here is making good points. So you're here to stand up for the mendacious fucks, I believe, right? So
was that my job?
Okay, so the elephant in the room in this conversation, to me anyway, is the potential harms to society that this all causes, and in particular, young men. I am not going to spell this out, though. I'm going to have Scott Galloway spell this out because I've heard him do multiple rants about the harms that this does to society. I think in general, he's not a fan. I'm not sure exactly what he wants to do to regulate it. I don't recall offhand, but I'm going to play a clip of Scott Galloway, and it's a couple minutes, and then I would get your reaction to it on the other side.
I just think it's out of control. And then the problem is, I don't think you're going to evangelize a 22-year-old. I think they get to make decisions, including stupid decisions. But I think they need to be educated about the risks they're taking. So gambling has the highest suicide rate of all addictions because most people, Ed, if you developed a meth addiction, we'd figure it out and we would try and move in. You could get on your phone and get addicted to gambling and lose everything. Guy spends his kid's college fund, mortgages his house. No one has any idea, and he decides, okay, I'm in too deep. Highest addiction rate. Yet there's no dedicated federal budget for gambling addiction treatment or research. By comparison, the National Institute for Drug Abuse allocated $1.6 billion for drug addiction research, and the CDC allocates about $310 million to tobacco control. And because there's so much money in this, it runs unregulated. Personal bankruptcy filings increased by 28% in states where sports betting gets legalized. So basically, bankruptcies surge by almost a third the moment you legalize gambling. It also disproportionately affects young men and low-income people. Approximately 15% of U.S. adults age 18 to 34 have problematic gambling behaviors compared to only 2% of people age 55 plus. 20% of male gamblers have a gambling problem compared to just 8% of the female gamblers. You can see above. Immature prefrontal cortex. Households with lower savings balances spend 32% more on gambling as a share of their income than high savings households looking for a way out. But it's increasingly difficult to regulate this because we no longer call it gambling. It's been rebranded as a prediction market. And these are casinos. They're more interesting. They might feel more substantive to bet on the outcome of the mayoral race. But be clear, folks, this is gambling. According to Kalshi, prediction markets are not gambling, but a form of financial market exchange. Yeah, fuck you. We're not that stupid. This is gambling. Whether you're gambling on the Jets or Mamdani, it's gambling. So the most profitable companies in the world all do the same thing. They tap into an instinctual flaw and they start monetizing this flaw despite the impact it has on consumers, whether it's tobacco companies getting people addicted to tobacco and then spending a ton of money to try and argue that nicotine wasn't addictive. And then when our mothers and our sisters continue to die, we finally figured this shit out. The same thing is happening here. So we have Trump, the crime family Trump, and we have the mendacious fucks at Robinhood deploying at scale using technology a drug that is highly addictive. So I'm horrified by this shit.
Okay, so kind of low energy Scott Galloway. He's kind of just resting on his hand, just kind of talk. I like it when he gets a little bit more animated. With Kara Swisher, he will just start screaming into the mic, and it's way more fun. But he makes good points. Even low energy Scott Galloway here is making good points. So you're here to stand up for the mendacious fucks, I believe, right? So
was that my job?
Give me your. I'm not too sure, but I want to hear your thoughts here in response to Scott Galloway.
Well, I used to cover responsible gambling within the gambling industry, so I don't have a lot of pushback against Scott Galloway here. I mean, I think, and I've covered the lawsuits that state gaming commissions have brought against Kalshi and Robinhood and friends, and what the tribes have brought against Kalshi and the prediction market companies. And I think the most dangerous thing for the prediction market industry is going to be themselves. And it's going to be this issue. I mean, a failure to properly educate the young men who gravitate toward these platforms, who are developing gambling disorders on these platforms, even if they're not clinically recognized as so. That's a huge danger for the industry, and that is happening. I was talking to Ilya Balin. He's this great professor who wrote this great history of derivatives, just published, I think earlier this year, I think in January. And he's a financial law expert. He's building a case against event contracts from the point of view of financial law. And he's saying, look, as we've gotten more speculative and as we've increased access to derivatives, we've moved from traditional derivatives where you're posting variation margin to event contracts where, it's this all or nothing bet. And yes, the platforms are increasingly paying interest. And so it's not quite as binary as it looks, but it's not going to make up for catastrophic losses like that. So in short, yeah, it's going to be this enormous problem. And it's not actually a new one. There's a researcher in California named Timothy Fong who he's been researching trading addiction well before the rise of prediction markets. And it's a tricky issue for gambling counselors who are counseling problem gamblers to get things under control. And when you're doing cognitive behavioral therapy with those patients, if they're doing it on a gambling app, you may be working on standard fallacies like don't chase losses and this isn't really worth it and you can't really win it back. But if it's in finance, if the gambling is dressed in finance, that's harder to break through, because you're not gambling, you're investing, and that window dressing is enough to create new challenges for gambling counselor providers as well. They're not impossible to overcome. There's great research and work in tweaking therapies to make sure that you can break through to those patients and help them recover. But no, responsible gambling is going to become an enormous fault line in the industry. And if the platforms aren't proactive about it, they're hanging a big anvil around their necks.
Yeah, I am curious about the education aspect here because if nothing else, like there should be some educational resources out there that companies are like providing to users. And I'm sure they do at some level. I'm sure it's not enough, but I'm also skeptical of that. And I'm curious if you have any thoughts about any that has been successful. Cause I'm thinking about like the DARE program when we were kids. Right.
Mm.
And then it turns out like DARE for drug addiction, it turns out that like it was counterproductive. And I think that can be, maybe even the same here because, you're learning, let's just say things like, you're more than likely going to lose your money. If you're young and you're a young man and like, you're like raging with testosterone, you're like main thing that you're thinking is like, yeah, but I'm not one of those suckers. Right. Yeah. Like that's not me. Like the fact that they all lost their money, that makes it more likely that I'm gonna like, your brain is thinking these weird, like dumb, immature ways. I don't know, but like, do you have any thoughts on any educational tactics that have been successful here? Or
I know the National Council on Problem Gambling has sponsored a few high school education programs. So they take you through some of those topics that you just raised. The odds are stacked against you, how the house is stacked against you, to basically preempt some of the later arguments you'll argue to yourself should you develop a gambling problem. So if you're reaching out to high schoolers and even middle schoolers about gambling and the reality behind those numbers, even if it's dressed in finance, those are some early intervention programs and prevention programs that have done quite well in keeping people from developing severe problems. And to their credit, platforms like Kalshi, they do have deposit limits and time limits. They've adopted a lot of the standard protections that sportsbooks offer. They're at a larger scale, and they're probably going to have to go further than the sportsbooks, because the sportsbooks will spend whatever they need to on responsible gambling as dictated by their state regulators or by state lawmakers. Since Kalshi is only accountable to the CFTC and they're available in all 50 states, and the same is going to be true of Polymarket quite soon, they're going to have to take a lead in some responsible trading programs as well to make sure that they're protecting their traders as well as they can.
What about regulation? It seems like to me the Trump administration has no interest in that. I mean, and yeah, I mean, just like it's just obvious, and they're like living it up. Just like
Trump
easy
finally
money
has
from
a
this
successful casino.
Yeah. There you go. Exactly. But kind of like, let's just say in the next 5 or 10 years, a couple election cycles happen, and we have more time to think about this. What are some smart regulations that you would put in place, or that you maybe think that we should look into more?
There are things I would look into. Still agnostic about whether some of these would have all the intended effect that we want. Some of them are market integrity things. So I'm curious to see how mention markets are going to survive in a new administration that's interested in placing guardrails. even if Brian Armstrong is not profiting off of saying whatever words he's going to say in the mention markets, that's an easily manipulatable market. That's not just being settled by reality. That can be settled by somebody who can control the outcome of the event. That's really the standard for market manipulation in derivatives and event contracts in particular. So I think you'll see some markets like that either get heavily limited or delisted altogether. I don't think it'd be unreasonable to see a future CFTC commissioner saying, "Hey, let's trim some of these different markets." I think those are going to be the big two. I think it's going to be trimming out some of the more, kind of quote unquote fun markets. And I think you'll see some of the integrity protections around events. So, the MLB announced that its sportsbook partners are going to put, I think, $200 limits on player props in the wake of a couple of scandals that have come out of the NBA and Major League Baseball. So, that should limit the monetary incentive for adjusting your own player performance to win a bet or help other people win bets. But those are the two paths I think we're going to see.